All right, so today I want to talk about conversational attributes. And specifically, I want to cover formatting, how to format the data for the submission of this data to Merchant Center. Now, there's already a lot of content out there on what conversational attributes are and how to think about them. So I will say, go listen to that stuff before watching this video. I'm not going to be covering it. And there's really great content regarding this from Mike Ryan. You can find his content on YouTube. He did a great webinar, as well as Feed Army, one of my favorite Merchant Center channels. They go into detail on each of these fields and how to think about them. So I'm not going to be covering that today. I'm going to be covering this from the context of you hopefully already know what all these fields are, and we're strictly sticking to formatting. Because the formatting for me was like a huge headache. Google made it very confusing on how to actually put all this data, get all this data to Merchant Center to work. So that's what I'm going to be covering today. I will be sharing my screen. It will be a Google Sheet. So I apologize if it's a little bit small, but I will be zooming in and hopefully making it legible for you. Also, I will be covering how to communicate this formatting to your client or your web team or your web store owner so they can get you an output that you can use for submission. And I think that's one of the really important parts because it really is held up on that. Can you get an output? Because this data set is quite large. It's quite a large data set. And it's not one you want to be doing manually. I am mostly approaching this only right now for clients that are quite fluent with AI, clients that have Claude integrations to their website, because in my opinion, that's the only way to create this output. Because in the example I'm going to share, I've got 6,000 fields or 6,000 lines of all these fields. So I will start with that and let's hop into the screen share. Okay, so first thing to start is I am using a Google Sheet and a supplemental feed submission. I like to do that for two reasons. One, it's easy for the client to edit. If they need to change something, assuming that their Claude is connected to this, they'll be able to just push the data through and it automatically every 24 hours updates to Merchant Center. So I like having that dynamic system. And also, by using the supplemental feed instead of the primary feed, in my opinion, it just feels a little less risky. I'm not going to have to deal with potential disapprovals or it messing up the primary feed. It's kind of separate, and if you did do something wrong, it's just going to treat that field as wrongly inputted. So I personally like the supplemental feed. Okay, first to start, the reason why this sheet will be long, and in this case, by the way, I'm just sharing a template. You're not seeing the full submission, but this client sells patio umbrellas, and they only have about 15 products. But we have about 6,000 SKUs because of variants. Our SKUs are separated by variant IDs. And there's a variant for every color of canopy, for every size, for every pole color. All these things add up to about 6,000 SKUs. And like I said, we have to do all this data at the SKU level, not the parent ID level, not the item title level. It's SKU level. So it can be a big data set. And I want to start first with one of the more complicated conversational attributes, which was product detail. And I found product detail specifically confusing because of the formatting or the language it used to explain the detail of the product. And it all comes down to this system that they have about, and I've got a little example here to explain it a little bit better of, section attribute value. And you'll see when we do the output, this is what it looks like. You have the section, the attribute, and the value separated by a colon. And what this basically means is the section name is what the product part is we're talking about. The attribute name is what part of this are we describing? And then the value is the value of that thing we're describing. I know that's kind of confusing, but the example will make more sense. So in this case, we are talking about the canopy. I want to describe different elements of the canopy. So the section name for all of these attributes are canopy. Then the attribute name in this example is the size. I want to talk about the size of the canopy. So the way that this looks, I'm just going to write it here is, canopy, size, 8 foot. That is telling the system we have an 8-foot canopy. Okay, the next one. I want to tell the system that we have a round canopy. Sometimes people search, I want a round umbrella that's 8 feet. The whole point of this is that data is communicated through this field. Okay, so it's canopy, size, round. Or is it canopy size, square? Canopy coverage area, 52 square feet. And this was so confusing by Google because they didn't really explicitly say that these are all up for our interpretation. I was really confused on, okay, are these attributes something that Google says I need to follow? For example, similar to how Google product category works, is there an itemized list that I need to choose? No, this is whatever you write here will be used. And the other confusing part was in most of Google's examples, they used general as the first field. And I was like, what the hell is general? Why is general being used as the section name? And that brings me to my next point. You don't always have to use a section name. In the case of, for example, I'll show you an example of, these are all the cases where you don't need a section name. Warranty is a perfect one. Warranty doesn't necessarily have a what part are we describing. It's just the warranty. There's no 3-part explanation. It's the warranty is 10-year. Or is this commercial grade? Commercial grade, yes. Is there an air vent? Yes, and in which case you can also leave it blank. You can put a space there instead if you want. So you could have space, comma, warranty, comma, 10-year. So understanding that really helped me get through this. And you can just see the example here. Okay, I want to talk about the pole next. The pole material is aluminum. The pole diameter is 1.5 inches. The pole wall thickness is 2.5 millimeters. And it goes on and on and on. And the way that this looks is we can have all of this data in one cell, separated by commas. So the way that this looks, you can see here is, okay, the canopy shape is round, comma. The canopy size is 8 foot, comma. Canopy coverage area 52 square, comma. And that was the other thing that was, not really explained clearly in Google's documentation, is I wasn't sure if I had to have a separate line item for all these things, or could they live in one cell? Now, talking about commas brings me to the next point, which relates more to a different field, but I want to discuss commas because of how they're used. As I mentioned, the comma is used to separate these items. And that is the same across all the fields. If we have product highlights, we can have up to 100 product highlights per SKU, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, 150 character product highlights. And yes, they can all live in one cell, and they need to be separated by commas. But what if we use a comma in a sentence? For example, in the Q&A area, you'll likely find commas in there. If you use a comma in that same context, and you're using a Google Sheet, which is a TXT file, I think, or something like that, not a CSV, these commas will always be used to separate the item in Google Merchant Center's eyes to make a new line item for it. And that will be the same if you use it in a sentence. So there's a special rule that we need to apply to sentence use of commas, which is you put a little / in front of it. So in this case, for question and answer, the question is, does the umbrella come with a base? Question. Now for the answer, we have to put a colon. So that's separate from this, but then we write no, and there's a comma in here. But we put a little / in front of it. So it's no / comma, the base is sold separately. And then it goes on and so forth, right? Here's another example. Can I replace the canopy, ? Colon, to distinguish the answer? Yes, / comma, the twistable top allows for blah, 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 blah. So I think that's a really important one that can trip you up is make sure the commas are respected as a delineation between two line items within a cell. Okay, so I want to talk about question and answer really quick as well, because there's a few misleading parts in the Google documentation. Now, you'll see in the Google documentation that it gives you this format with like quotes in it. So question, quote, dot, answer, blah, blah. And what's a bit confusing is that format is only for, I think, CSV, which is if you like upload a CSV doc. But if you're using a Google Sheet, similar to how we had to change how we use the commas, if you're using a Google Sheet, you don't need those quotes. You don't need those quotes. It's not recognized. So the format is a lot simpler. It's just like you put the question, you have the colon, and then the answer. It's pretty simple as that. And then separated afterwards by a comma. So I just want to mention that because that was a something that tripped me up at first as well. Okay, so the next one I want to talk about is the next few are a lot simpler, and we'll kind of rip through them, is related product. So as you know, for related product, there's various ones, right? There's part of a set, required parts, frequently bought together, substitute, alternative, accessories. I'm not going to get into how or why to use each one. We're just sticking to format. So in this case, the way that we do this is first we identify the actual related product category. So in this case, we're writing accessory. Then you have a colon, and there's two ways to identify the product from here, either the ID of the product or the GTIN. And that's the next part of this we need to identify. So after the first colon, you'll see there's ID here, then colon, and I give the product ID. If you want to use GTIN, the way this will look is accessory, colon, GTIN, colon, you put the GTIN there. I think ID is a bit more applicable in most cases, so I'm doing ID for almost all of mine. But it is important to identify both and know that no matter what, you have to identify, are you using the ID or the GTIN? So if you were to, for example, be doing frequently bought together, or let's do substitute, we would write substitute, colon, ID, colon, Shopify ID. And you can do any and every one in here. You can, in one cell, you can put accessories, you can put part of a set, you can mix them all in there, as long as you separate them by a comma. Don't forget the comma. Okay, next I want to talk about popularity rank and how to use it. Now, I'm basing my rule for popularity rank actually from somebody that I read about this on LinkedIn. I forget who posted this, but I thought it was a pretty good example of how to establish popularity rank. And this might change in the future for me, but I am basing popularity rank off a series of rules off of the store's sale data and the percent of volume of sales. So it's like the top 1% of products sales, I'm going to be putting as a popularity rank of 100. The top 5% of product sales, I'm going to be putting 95. Top 10%, 90, and then the average 50. Now in this example, it's not respected here because this is just an example. You'll see I've got different numbers here, but I am going to be making them generalized based off of the sale of the sales on the store, and the actual like specific number doesn't matter. It's the difference between the numbers are what matters. Okay, so I also want to mention how to validate in Merchant Center if all this data is populating properly. So if you just go to products, and then in your product, if you scroll down to additional details, you'll see this drop down. This is where you'll see everything submitted. So you'll see your related product details, and you see how they're all, even though we had them in one cell, they are all appearing here as separate items. This is telling me that, the commas are working, and this is where you can also validate if you did a comma wrong and you've got, for example, like, two question and answer lines that are split in half because you forgot to put the backslash. So this is where we can validate the work. And this was a bit confusing for me as well, because it's not like I assumed that this data would show um, as a column in my like product table, but there's no columns for these. You have to go to product detail in each product. So unfortunately, we can't really validate this at like a mass level of we're just scrolling through all of our products, seeing all these columns. You don't need to check each one. Like I just checked a few to make sure the outputs worked, but you have to see it at the product level. So going next, I want to talk about how I put all this into context for my client. And I think an important one is, again, speaking about this to clients who are fluent with AI, because these outputs shouldn't be done manually. I think it would be a wild task. And what I did was I gave them this template, and then I gave them this sheet that had all of the fields, the format rules, an example, and importantly, the document from Google that supports that field. That way, their Claude system can read all of this and understand it. And once we did that, it was literally almost a first try success. Like their first output, the only thing it really got wrong was using how it used the commas. It was shockingly good once we gave it all this data. So I just hopped on a call with my client. I explained all this stuff like I'm explaining to you right now, but I gave them this data to give their AI and then for them to talk to, and then generate a Google Sheet for an output. So I think it's honestly as simple as that, and it's just about understanding the small details that could really catch you, which are the things that I covered in this little video. So I hope this is helpful. I also want to mention uh, measurement. Everyone's asking me once speaking about, successfully loading this stuff, like, how can we tell it works? We can't. That we can't really measure what lift this is going to give us. It's not like Merchant Center is going to say, oh, this conversational attribute related to this many searches. There's not going to be any way to really measure its lift. And I don't care. I don't care if we can't measure the lift on this. It's clear that ads management moving forward is more about first-party data, and the data we give this system. And this is first-party data, right? The data that we have on our products are the fuel to the algorithm to make these granular, detailed connections from search queries to our products. So I don't really care that it's not measurable. I think it's worth the invested effort to get this stuff integrated, and I hope it's successful for you. And I will say, a huge resource for me has been the Feed Army Codex group. The folks at Feed Army, Emmanuel has a forum that you have to pay to be in it, but you can ask him tons of questions, and he helped me problem solve a lot of this stuff. Also join if you're if you're close to a European time zone. I have a mastermind where every week we meet and talk about a lot of this stuff. Like a lot of these details we kind of problem solved as a group in our weekly calls. So join my school group, the EU Google Ads Collective. And yeah, happy formatting. All right. See you next time.